The reason that I do what I do is to help give credence to the older generation of artists, regardless if they're a good artist or if their work is much more classical or traditional. They chose to be an artist, especially in a place where in the 70s and 80s it was so challenging for society to accept them being artists. And what kept them, you know? Why? Why? That's the main question that I always asked is, why, despite all the challenges, did you and are you still an artist, you know? My name is Suzy Sikorski. I'm an art researcher based in Dubai. I'm a Middle Eastern art specialist at Christies, as well as running and founder of Mideast Art, which is a digital storytelling platform that focuses on modern Middle Eastern art history analysis, as well as covering contemporary practices. And realized over time now, after over 3.5 years of forming Mideast Art, that I am a storyteller. I love capturing and sharing the stories of artists from the region that are not just innate to being an artist, but just being human. I have been to many, many local artists' studios and homes, from old Dubai to Khorfa Khan to Sharjah. So when I have conversations with these artists that run for hours and hours of discussions, sometimes it's between the artists one-on-one, sometimes it's with the artists and their family. There's crying babies involved, there's a whole plate full of Arabic coffee and dates, and then the hours the sun turns into night and I'm looking at the sky, and it's such an emotional experience that I've had with so many of these artists. After these countries established independence and formed countries, their national art societies, and the government started sending students abroad, which was a direct shuttle a lot of the time to Cairo. A few students studied in Baghdad, some in London, some in the US. You had the journals, proper art writing and events, exhibitions that were actually very much institutionalized in their own respective regions. Naturally, when they were studying abroad and educated and learned the language of the canon of Western art history, and they had this intention, how do we implement what we've learned in my own society? How do we invigorate and how do we stimulate avant-garde thinking of what art is and against, let's say, the more classical art regimes, and they wanted to change, what they wanted to showcase. The Art and Liberty group that was formed in Cairo in Egypt, late 1930s, early 1940s. It focused specifically on surrealism. That was very much a part of this cross-pollination with not only art, but politics. And then you have, other artists like the Casablanca school that started in the 1960s. And many of these modern artists were not only artists, they were professors in these universities. And they were well informed of what was happening globally at the time. A lot of these manifestos, a lot of times you see that were male, but at the same time, and there is much more of an initiative now to unearth the female initiatives that were being formed of artists like Inji Aflatoon, like Etel Adnan, like Huguette Caland, Hanan Khal. You find so many of these directors and people working in the galleries, in arts foundations, institutions are women, and so naturally they're going to have much more of a say in showcasing these untold stories of women. So it's something that's been addressed recently. Christie's is an international auction house. We are the first auction house to come to the region. There's a lot that we do as an international team. We're part of the 21st century where Impressionist modern has now merged with post-war and contemporary art. It's a very interesting opportunity to work at an auction house and source artwork, source masterpiece works coming from families that have kept these works in their collections since generations, and they're now looking to part ways with it. Since we started our auction in 2006, there's been a lot more to do in terms of properly authenticating works to disband, any types of fakes that would be circulating or reproductions of works. We always consult different experts in the field. Now you have many different scholars that are specializing specifically on modern Iraqi art or modern Egyptian art. And then when you look at the West, many of these works, all of these works of artists have a catalogue raisonné, so it's already something that is so indoctrined within the system. I'm happy to have one of my colleagues, Valérie Didier, who had produced the first catalogue raisonné of an artist from the region of Mahmoud Said, which has really been a proper foundation to look back at and set precedents to what's been needed for many artists across the region to help in due diligence and properly authenticating works of art. What comes into play is the provenance of which collections it's from. Maybe it came from a family across the generations. If we have photographs of the artworks in these families' homes from the 60s, 70s, 80s, if it's been exhibited in regional biennales, if it went to Venice Biennale, if it traveled, and it's so important because it shows the uniqueness, and at the time of this work was important. The Artists in Quarantine series with Mideast Art was something that I've learned by speaking with artists that has helped them be connected to a creative pulse. And there's been much more of a push from learning locally what artists are in our backyards. What artists in the creative community are doing. Naturally, I started asking a lot of the artists from the region, what are you doing? Can you share with me a few images of your studio? And I just started to post images, and I amassed a collection. The quotes I received from these artists were raw. Rahma Abdullah, she said to me, a lovely paradox. Does my art matter? I kept asking myself that question a lot in quarantine. It is funny that I started to question my worth in a pandemic. In such a situation, you need the things you love around you the most and not to be skeptical about it. I finally realized that paying attention is much more important than getting attention, because only then are you in the moment and absorbing your reaction, rather than letting the environment decide how you should react to your own art, to your own self. I've never felt this free and restricted at the same time. The sense of does my art matter? So many times artists are sharing work and the feedback of the public is reinforcement and accreditation if the work is good or not. And I think from this time it allowed people to realize that the power that they have is within. And it's so important to be connected to this creative community, and whether it's online now, so be it. But that was really important.